Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. And it looks like we are recording. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really appreciate all of the active partnerships that might get a chance to be highlighted this morning because we are joined by Dr. Rosta Farzan from the University of Pittsburgh. And last week we had a conversation with Coro Pittsburgh just around kind of like best practices for intern management, ways that nonprofit organizations can think about maximizing hours, oftentimes with students from universities locally. But there are other ways to very intentionally partner with universities. And I know, thanks to Dr. Ashley Priore, one of our consultants, I am constantly thinking about ways that we can do that with the GPNP and our youth work. And so without further ado, I'm going to jump right into our presentation. I want to make sure that this shares the correct screen. All right. So as you know, we host these conversations each Monday from 10 to 11 a.m. Since March of 2020, when these calls originated, we've hosted 5,303 convenings via Zoom and have had 45,353 participants. So over the last few years, these have been extremely active conversations. And I would say last year we averaged between 20 to 35 folks per call, whether that was, timely check-ins on, funding opportunities or updates from funders, or just kind of reacting to opportunities or partnerships that were coming up. And I know the UPMC Community Center in the East End, prior to opening, actually participated in one of these calls to get feedback from community members to make sure that the resources and programs that were going to be available on site under the leadership of Thomas Washington were actually what the community needed and weren't duplicating or replicating things that were already happening in the East End extremely successfully through nonprofits. And so with that in mind, I really want folks to think this morning about, what type of lens have we traditionally thought about partnerships with universities, and how can we expand or broaden that a little bit? Hearing from Dr. Farzan herself, thinking through what Pitt has been able to accomplish in some current and possible partnerships as well. As you know, the Forbes Funds works through three frameworks. Two I see as the what of our work, and the 8 R's is the how. But the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we encourage the University of Pittsburgh to adopt as a framework for measuring success and tracking programs. 5 years ago, I believe, it was one of the earliest cities to do so. And since then, we've partnered with a lot of nonprofit organizations, encouraging them to adopt this language, not only so we have very similar goals in mind that we're sharing, but the progress and the tracking each of the individual indicators related to those goals, just making sure that we're using the same language. And while the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are extremely specific, that's why we also use the social determinants of health as a second framework for helping organizations understand ways that they can partner better or differently or innovatively to meet community needs. So if there's an organization serving a specific geographic area, focusing on healthcare access and quality, but that same area has a lot of programs that are really building social and community context, what are ways that we can collaborate effectively and see our work as aligned and complementary rather than competitive? So again, those are the kind of the whats and the whys of the work, and the 8 R's are the how. The model that the Forbes Funds developed to track what it is that determines success in a partnership, because a lot of times there's funding at the table to incentivize partnerships, but also how are we tapping into our unique assets or commitments to equity work to make sure that we're pulling up different seats to the table, but also giving folks a voice at the table when we're thinking about different ways of serving populations or developing resources. Return on policy, because we know that no one sector can do this work by itself. And so if there are different constraints on the nonprofit sector that don't apply to the small business sector, how are we building up neighborhoods leaning into both of those different ways of working and different lens of serving individuals? So Just as a reminder to set kind of the stage for our conversation today, thinking through the collaborative mindset and how you might partner with University of Pittsburgh. Very quickly, I'm going to read Dr. Farzan's bio. She is the Associate Dean of DEI in the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh. She is also a professor in the Department of Informatics and Network Systems. She completed her PhD in Intelligent Systems program at the University of Pittsburgh in 2009 and joined faculty of the School of Computing and Information in 2012. Her research focuses on partnering with local marginalized communities to design, implement, and deploy technology that centers individuals and communities that may have been historically excluded from the space. Her work has been funded by federal agencies, foundations, and industry, and has resulted in publications in high-impact venues in the field of human-computer interaction, social computing, and information science, including a number of Best Paper Awards at major conferences. Her contribution to Community Engaged Scholarship was awarded by the university in 2022 Chancellor Distinguished Service Award. So again, we know that no one organization can solve all of society's challenges on their own, but it is also clear that no one sector has all of the answers as we're developing solutions. University nonprofit partnerships are integral for nonprofits getting access to timely and critical resources, and also for universities to understand critical needs on the ground. So today's community call will talk about the realities of different ways that University of Pittsburgh specifically, researchers and classes could or currently support the nonprofit sector. So with that, I'll turn it over to Fred to share some initial insight on the conversation. And Dr. Farzan, please, the floor is yours as soon as Fred turns it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Farzan, it's great to see you. It's been a while. I'm on the board of visitors for the School of Computing and Information, so we've been working together for several years now. So I'm excited to have you on the call. In particular, post the Supreme Court decision, how the university has looked at the role of DE&I, and actually how does it translate into building both a diverse set of students as well as a diverse set of instructors, and how does that translate into building different relationships and grassroots communities as a target of your work. So I'm excited to hear your presentation and look forward to a robust conversation. So it's good to see you.
Hi, yeah, good to see you, Fred. And thanks for having me at this call. I'm really excited to have this conversation. And as I was talking to Emily earlier, also, I have a presentation. I don't have to go through my slides. So at any moment, if you want to interrupt me and ask questions, I really would like this to be more of a conversation. And really kind of following up what Emily said, it's really about this idea that we need to partner to make change happen. And I hope to provide some ideas that would be really starting conversations. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, as my screen is shown, it's all okay? Okay. Yeah, and thanks for the introduction. So I'm not going to talk too much about myself since Emily did my introduction already. I just want to talk a little bit more in the context of the conversation that I'm going to have today. So my work in this intersection of the social computing and human-computer interaction is really about thinking about how do we partner with community members, with nonprofit organizations that work with the communities to think about how technology should really be retaught and redesigned. So traditionally, really, technology has been created by a very specific group of people for a very specific group of people. And so here is really kind of thinking about what are the populations that have been excluded traditionally from thinking about how technology should exist, how technology should be designed, how it should be deployed in different contexts, and really rethink a more just and more equitable designs and implementation and deployment of technology. So a lot of my work really centers around working with these different groups. I work with older adults, I work with youth, like, communities that their voice is really important in how we think about design of technology and integration of technologies in kind of issues that the technology can actually help to resolve. And this is really, I do this work supported really within our school. And as Emily mentioned, I'm also the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at our school. And that's in the role that I've had prior interaction with Fred and have already learned a lot from our conversation. So I really am excited to have this opportunity of talking today. And these technology for social change is something which is a priority for our school as a whole. And we try to think about how do we make this happen. And in my role as Associate Dean of DEI, part of my responsibilities is to think about how do we do a better job in these sorts of engagement. As Fred mentioned, how do we increase the diversity of our students, our faculty, but also diversity of how technology is really created and what technology can do, which would actually not add more into the problems, but actually try to solve societal issues. And again, as Emily mentioned, we also acknowledge that this is not a work that could be done at the university or at the industry alone, and really partnerships with nonprofit organizations, communities are crucial to make this happen. A lot of problems exist because actually we are lacking these sorts of partnerships, and we take this very seriously and is a very important priority at our school. So there are different ways that we try to engage and partner with members of communities and nonprofit organizations. A lot of our classes, the course projects, are basically designed as a way of doing kind of more hands-on work within the communities. And I should say that that's actually really motivating to the students. When the students think like that what they're working on is something meaningful, as opposed to a project that they're just going to throw out at the end of the semester. So it's really kind of a win-win situation when we can think of projects that students do within especially local communities around the campus and take kind of their work in those communities. And these could involve designing technologies. It could be doing data analysis. A lot of the work are actually centered around these sort of supporting data analysis, designing framework for data analysis, but also kind of designing different sorts of technology. And then there's like a lot of kind of collaborative research. That's the part that I'm going to focus more in the rest of this presentation. We also do service projects that might not be necessarily course or research, but is really kind of to partner with communities and work together to think about kind of how can we bring our expertise together to solve problems. And we also have our students being recruited by nonprofit organizations and by different kind of organizations as interns or full-time employees. So these are kind of the different ways that engagement and partnership can happen. And we welcome all of those, and we try to really facilitate all of these forms. So as I said, I'm going to talk more about some of the collaborative research that happens at our school by myself and also by other faculty in our school. I'm highlighting only some. There's definitely a lot more than this, but just kind of to, given the time limit, just talk about some different areas that our faculty work. I've also included the name of the faculty on the top of the slide. You can see, and kind of for each of the project, I have their name. So if you want to take a note of who is connected to that project, but also you can, of course, connect with me, and I can connect you to any of these faculty if you're interested in that particular area. Or just kind of have a conversation with me, and we can think about how we can talk about a partnership. So some of the work that I have done, as I mentioned, I work with older adult population as one of the populations that are affected a lot by the way that technology has really excluded them. In this particular project, we're working on thinking about information seeking and how this is working with a group of Black older adults in the Hill District neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And really trying to kind of learn from them of how do they go about finding information. They have had really good practices of finding information, being able to assess information. And we have kind of introduced technology that completely ignored their practices and kind of now putting them in situations that they are struggling with kind of doing things the way that they know and not really supporting them in that. So we have been working with them for about a year. We have learned actually a lot about kind of their practices and learn about kind of where the technology can kind of be supportive, where the technology has limitations. So for example, relying on voice assistant is pretty important for that population. And the other thing that is important is they rely a lot on interpersonal communication, working together, calling someone for asking for information, things that really the current ways of information seeking don't really support. So we are now working with them to actually redesign kind of how a voice assistant could look like, something like Google Home or Amazon Alexa, in ways that would actually bring together more of these interpersonal communications and supporting kind of more collective information seeking, as opposed to thinking about information search as a very individualistic activity. In another work that I work actually with Amy Babe, one of my colleagues, and colleagues at actually other schools in the university as well, we're looking at how do we support people who are dealing with environmental justice issues in being able to collect data and then campaign for and advocate for changes within kind of their communities. So we provide, this is a work that we have now been doing with Hazelwood. We actually just got new funding to continue this work in the Hazelwood neighborhood of Pittsburgh, providing low-cost sensors to people like living in different areas that are particularly affected by the developments that is happening in the Hazelwood neighborhood, to be able to monitor the air quality. We work actually with the students and the schools in the neighborhood as well. And we had actually really this interesting project of having the students install both air quality monitoring and filtering in the rooms that they thought is important for them, being able to collect the data and being able then supporting them in analyzing that data and making sense of the data, and do what we call data storytelling, to be able to tell the story that they want to tell about data. Some work that are done actually by some of my colleagues, really focusing on Black girls and developing this identity of Black girls as developers and as builders and creators. In that project, they really work on building robots, that these robots actually represent themselves. And in kind of both, they are in building the robots, they have that representations of themselves in the robots, but also kind of developing the identity that they can be individuals who actually make these robots, and they can be the individuals that decide how these robots actually behave and what do these robots do, how do they speak, what language they use, what accent they use when they speak. That's a work done by my colleague, Dr. Angela Stewart. Another work by another colleague of mine, Ryan Shi, who is looking at involuntary engagement for food security. He particularly collaborates with nonprofits like 412 Rescue, and thinking about AI models that would actually help improve this volunteer engagement and how kind of people help with this distribution of food and food security. Work by another colleague of mine, Tim Hong, who is looking at nostalgia-driven design, working actually with also older adults in the Hill District neighborhood in creating virtual reality experiences that allows actually these older adults to kind of create the neighborhood, the Hill District that they know, and they will build kind of, again, their stories of the neighborhood that now they can share with their grandkids. They can kind of bring their memories. So they're actually using pictures that exist and what they know. So they use those pictures to kind of think about kind of memories that they have, and then they're implementing these in this virtual reality environment. Another work of mine, which is kind of focused on that data-driven thinking. This is working with high school students. A lot of that has been working with high school students in Homewood. Again, we engage them as advisors. They actually teach us a lot in kind of what we need to build, and they're the ones who really can know a lot of kind of what we can learn from, and we really try to center them as advisors, as individuals who are actually teaching us, and really adopt this model that it should be a conversation. So these high school students, we have had like about 2 years of working with them in thinking about what does it mean to work with data. Data at work could actually be a very multidisciplinary. So we try to introduce this framework that as you work with data, you can be a data detective, that you're trying to find patterns in data, but you can also be a data artist that think about creative way that you communicate and you tell the story from the data and those patterns that you find. You can be a data journalist, and you can actually play these different roles at different times, depending on kind of what expertise you bring or what interests you have. And this is something that, again, has the goal of developing an identity among these students that they can actually be a data scientist, they can be actually working with data, but also kind of helping them in building stories about what data is being collected, how data is being collected, and what stories are being told about the data, and how they can use this data for making changes that they like in their communities. So when we work with high school students, a lot of times what they care about are issues in the school. So discipline data is a data set that very often they're interested in working and thinking about what kind of causes in high level of discipline in some schools and and how Black students a lot of times are a lot more affected by it. And so they find patterns in data that Black teachers or female teachers could actually have a positive impact in how the students are treated in the schools. And they try to actually create these art pieces that communicate kind of this message and take that on social media. So the other project I'm going to talk about actually a little bit in more details is this community engaged digital enablement program. This is actually a work that was funded by RK Mellon and through collaboration with Ozanam organizations that are in the Hill District, and some of you maybe are familiar with them. So we work closely with Karen and Darrell in that work. It was a work with my colleague and former PhD student of mine. So here, what we wanted to do is that how do we design kind of a program for high school students in the area that not only kind of the program supports a skill development for these high school students being in the program, but it has kind of a more sustainable impact within the neighborhood to increase kind of the digital capital of the neighborhood, be kind of a more of digital enablement. So we, through actually working with Ozanam, we met some of the small businesses in the neighborhood. So some of these are the businesses that we worked with. And I'm thinking about kind of what are their digital needs? What are the digital needs that they don't have the capacity inside their businesses to actually support that? So what we learned, for example, is that social media presence, marketing through social media, and web presence is something that could actually easily be taught to the students, and it kind of addresses some of the needs of these organizations. So we worked on designing this 12-week program for the high school students. The logo that we see here is actually what the students designed themselves. And we had actually these embroidery businesses that kind of created t-shirts for them that they all had with the logo on them to wear at the end of the program. So they went through these 12 weeks of programming, focusing on learning about these social media development and web development skills. And what we did every week was a blend of technical skill development, but also conversations about what does it mean to kind of try to apply this knowledge within the communities? What are the things that they care about? When they think about the small businesses, what are the businesses that they care about? Why do they care about them? So we would have kind of these discussions within these sessions, and the students, so you can see like an example of someone talking about Rita's Italian Ice as like one business that they care about, and kind of how they think that why they care about them, and maybe like how they can actually support them. And then they would look at like their web presence. They would discuss like how they can actually maybe improve that. And so they also learned to like create their own websites. And a lot of times really kind of what they were thinking about, how they can design and use these kind of knowledge that they gain towards more entrepreneurships and creating kind of web pages that would actually be for businesses. But you can actually, as you can see in this example, it was really without any kind of prompting of what these need to be, would actually really bring together technology and social change and thinking about social change. So this is one of actually the participants. All these participants had no prior background in using, in creating a web page or having kind of any programming language. So in all of our programs, we really make sure that there is no requirement. So this is really accessible to everyone, and everyone should be kind of encouraged. And we always have people from different ages also participating in that. So in this case, we had like the students that were from 10-year-old to 17-year-old participating. And so this is a web page created by one of them. They started by idea generation of what they want to have on their website, and then actually getting at implementing their website. So this one, this person wanted to create a web page, which was for a business that would create t-shirts, but the t-shirts would have this peace promotion focus as well. And another project I'm going to finish after this talking about another work by a colleague of mine that I think is really a great project, and wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. So this is a work done by Dr. Akash Gadam. And so he is really interested in the issues of empowered reentry and how we can facilitate the reentry of the returning citizens into society, given the challenges that they face, both systemic challenges and personal challenges that they face. So this is a work that started 2 years ago in San Francisco. He has moved to joined our school recently, so I moved from California. So the work is started in San Francisco, but he's continuing the work now in Pittsburgh. And thinking about how to partner with nonprofits that are already working with this population, and they already have a lot more of trust within the population. They know how to work with the population, and think about kind of how we can support that. So in his conversation with these organizations, he has learned that digital literacy is actually an important barrier for the returning citizens, given that how much we now rely on digital literacy for finding jobs, finding services. And then at the same time, like as working kind of with the organizations, really acknowledging that a lot of times we build technologies that ignores the practices of an organization, and it becomes like an overhead and very quickly kind of becomes irrelevant. So really understanding kind of how the technology could support the organization as opposed to introducing new processes. So understanding that for actually these population of returning citizen, the personal connection is really important. We don't want to automate everything into like, now you use this system. So it's actually the system that they're trying to design is to support the staff at these nonprofit organizations that actually would help with the job search and job and building kind of resume and thinking about how to find jobs. So it basically provides them information to the staff, and then the staff kind of works directly with the individuals in building the resume, thinking about what are the existing jobs and how do you want to talk about kind of the expertise and the skills that you have in ways that kind of matches with existing jobs. So first looking kind of then based on these job lists, suggest kind of skills that could be included. Have like tools like these that would actually help with building resume, and if each section kind of nudge about how should you talk about what the skills you have, if you have a high school degree, if you have a college courses that you have taken, if you have done any sort of training, and kind of work together in building this resume. So this is a work that he's now continuing working with Foundation of Hope. He's looking for partners. So if this is something that anyone in this group has connections or interested, he's looking for more partners in Pittsburgh of really kind of continuing this thinking about how as technologists we can actually think about designing processes and designing systems that would be supportive of returning citizens. Okay. So I'm going to stop. Sorry that I talked a lot about the different projects. Feel free to ask questions about any of them or ask questions not related to anything that I talk about. I would love to have now conversations about
Thank you so much for sharing, especially such detailed information about like current opportunities. I think so there were a couple of comments in the chat, one from John Turak, who's at Penn State Extension. And I know, John, feel free to come off mute to talk to Dr. Farzan directly, but I know a lot of that work based in Westmoreland County has primarily been around building up capacity around agriculture and community, like community development partnerships. John, feel free to kind of go back and forth a little bit.
Don't need to go back and forth. That was just in response to you can introduce yourself. That was my name and organization. But you know, there's lots of resources there beyond the great resources that Rosta has shared. Encourage folks to explore the website if they need resources.
Thanks, John. And I also saw James' response highlighting the Fayette County Cultural Trust partnership for 10 years with the Frederick Honors Program, contact with Brian Schultz to bridge the urban-rural divide, and looking at developing the Educational Entrepreneurial Center, including the Osher Center, or Osher Lifelong Learning Center, which is just fabulous. Remember, we heard from Lisa Sharfstein as part of a panel discussion with Jamie Ducar. I think it was late last year, right after the summit, which was just extremely eye-opening, just hearing about all the great work that's taking place. So after kind of the quick highlights, my question is really what the process for beginning these partnerships looks like. I know there's a lot of research that's driven by professors and their individual work, but there are also needs of the communities that kind of crop up as part of these different studies or partnerships directly. So how does something get to the level of like a 10-year partnership with the honors program?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And so some of you might be familiar. So the University of Pittsburgh has these community engagement centers. A lot of partnership, we work with those centers that are, there are 3 centers at this time. There's one in the Hill District, one in Homewood neighborhood, and one in Hazelwood. And so that's like the commitment of the university to these communities and neighborhoods, and generally for community engagement. As I said, I also, in my position as Associate Dean of DEI, my position is actually related to this community engagement and managing of the community engagement. So I would be also a person that if you're interested to have conversation, reach out and we'll basically have conversation. We would love to kind of invite you to meet maybe with people that are relevant, or talk about kind of the work that you're doing in the organization, and how that could be kind of, what are some of the issues that you're trying to solve, and how we can maybe together about those issues. So I would say that both through the community engagement centers and by contacting me would be a really good way to start the conversation. If you want to directly connect to any of these faculty, again, I'm happy to also make that connection as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So for some of the partnerships that you highlighted that are currently in place, are they highlighting any kind of like needs or gaps that might result in other upcoming opportunities? Or is there a way that kind of on the reverse side, if the university identifies something, that there's like a, not like a notice of funding, but like a kind of a call? I was talking to Dr. Sudi recently about some opportunities specifically with faith-based nonprofit organizations and partnerships with the university. So, how do those kind of opposite types of opportunities get shared out?
Right. So that's exactly about that kind of long-term relationship building. And what really we are interested is building these sorts of more sustainable long-term relationships. So like the project that I mentioned in terms of working with the small local businesses, the idea was that the students actually who went through that program, then they served as interns for those businesses. And that's kind of a way of creating more longer-term relationship. But also like in terms of, so when we hope to build these partnerships in a ways that then as kind of opportunities come, then we kind of can get together and go after an opportunity. So a lot of the work has been, so I work very closely with Homewood Children's Village. We have been partnering now for 5-6 years, and it's really as kind of things come, then we say, okay, well now there's like these funding opportunities. Let's think together about what we can submit. This is kind of the same way that I'm working now with the Hazelwood Initiatives and Center of Life in Hazelwood. So the same idea that the partnerships are not just for one specific project, but we hope to think about, we care about this issue. We think that we can partner in thinking about these issues. So let's kind of work together and have this readiness that we can actually then go after different opportunities that become available.
That's extremely helpful. Something that I'm just gonna kind of throw out there, and if it makes sense, great. If not, it's totally fine. But something that we talked about a little bit with Pitt for the last GPNP summit was a series of kind of like department specific, or even like, hey, anyone who's partnering with nonprofit organizations, kind of like mixers or meet and greets or something to be able to facilitate those in-person meeting opportunities. I know the CEC just hosted the awards earlier this year, highlighting some of these specific partnerships. So I just wanted to say on the GPNP side, I would love to do something in collaboration with you all, because I think especially going into a summit year, which is a really great opportunity to highlight what we're doing with our AI cohorts, and that's that technology side. There seems to be a lot of great resources that I just want to make sure that we're amplifying anything that's coming through and working for at least one organization, because then it's a success and it's worth it.
Yeah, so that's exactly very close to kind of some of the plans that we have. One of the things that we hope we can implement, and we're looking for funding resources to actually be able to support that, is to have these community office hours that basically would be regularly on a weekly basis, a space that then for organization that could actually come and talk about issues, and we'll have like space for conversation around that. We're also working on organizing an event that would kind of highlight. So I talked about a few of the projects, but have like a more bigger kind of representations of the different work that is happening at our school. I think that Fred might be part of the conversation around these conversations as well, about how we think about kind of different levels that we can actually create, both in terms of educational program, certificates, but also kind of ways that, especially focusing on data and focusing on AI, of providing support to nonprofit organizations as kind of different levels of, so a small kind of needs, providing maybe education and degrees at kind of like a different level for someone who wants to get maybe more advanced education around that, or kind of more project-based. So I think these are really aligned with the way that we are thinking about partnership as well.
That's really helpful. Fred, I saw you come off mute. Go ahead.
Dr. Farzan, I really appreciate the focus you guys are looking at. When we start looking at expanding that network beyond the community, has your department looked at global partnerships as a way to enrich the stream of thought and ideology, not just in Pittsburgh, but outside of Pittsburgh? And if so, what does that look like as partnerships, as well as you consider what you've offered today?
Yeah, so I would say that probably that's a conversation that just now is starting. So I've had some conversation with the business school, because I think they have been pretty good in doing some global work, and work not just on the outside of Pittsburgh, but outside of the US. And so we are discussing like possible work together. I know that their associate dean of Paul Harper was actually visiting some of African countries, and we are scheduled to have a conversation about that. He was away for the summer. So I would say that we haven't done anything in that area, but it's a conversation that now we are interested in starting and thinking about how do we actually expand our focus. At the same time, is also the local focus is pretty important. So when we go to our classes, we still have a very low representations of our own communities in our school. So these kind of, we are really hoping that through these projects, it's working with the communities and issues within the communities, but also kind of bringing the communities into our school. So I think that we are definitely interested in expanding, but we also don't want to lose our focus on working with the local communities as well.
I definitely agree with you. I think there should be a priority on the local communities, but at the same time, I would say that the rapid change in Pittsburgh and the global application, do we offset teaching people to get to learn a platform that's not as viable as the one that's coming? Like, right. Is there a bridge between ramping up their ability at Pitt and also seeing the trajectory of the global economy? Because I think every time we talk about this conversation and we start talking about DEI and other things, my opinion is we typically had this framework of leveling the playing field and saying, hey, you're welcome to participate. But you're asking people to participate where they have a horse and buggy and other people got a racing car, right? And it's just not, even though you're opening up the door for them to participate, they don't have the same capacity to even run the race. And so there's a false narrative about it's open and it's inclusive. And I'm not saying that's not true, but their ability to be competitive is limited their experience. And so I know that this is a lot, but is there any thought about the integration of both? Because as we build up people's local IQs around what Pitt offers, Pitt is at the same time doing global work.
Yeah, so I think that capacity building is essential. So unless we are doing that, the inclusivity is not, the work needs to be focused on capacity building. And what we are hoping to do through these projects is not just the participation in a limited project, but it is kind of more thinking about that capacity building. And so those are the conversations that, as I mentioned, we think about building AI capacity. A lot of now organizations are basically competing and being competitive because of their AI and data capacity. So it's really kind of thinking about those capacity buildings, if that makes sense, answers your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. I don't see any other questions coming through in the chat. If anybody has any final thoughts or, questions for Dr. Farzan, this was really helpful. I'm really glad that we recorded the presentation. Dr. Farzan, would you be comfortable sharing the slides? So in case anyone who missed the call can just download them from our newsletter on Friday.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to share the slides. And yeah, if anyone has questions now, or if you want to send me any notes and have a conversation, we'd love to continue this.
Thank you so much. And a shout out to Kimberly. I appreciate you putting your name and organization in the chat and wishing everyone good morning. That's a practice that we're working on starting for the remainder of the community calls, just so we can get a feel for who's attending without having to scroll through the tops. I know that this early in the week and on Monday mornings, people tend to be off camera, but just making sure if there's an opportunity that comes up or we want to follow up with folks that are on this call, it's really helpful for us to be able to know who to forward information to. So for future calls, name and organization kind of first at the beginning of the call in the chat. I'm going to very briefly go through a policy update from the Forbes funds, and then we will close out our conversation this morning. For this week, we're focusing on a couple of, here we go. A couple of local, state, and national updates from a few weeks ago. We're a little behind on the policy calls because the presentations have been so like hour to hour, and we only have just 10 minutes left today. But there was a consulting firm that recommended closing 16 PPS locations and opening 2 new schools as part of a district-wide restructuring plan. So this would bring the total of schools in the PPS school district from 54 to 40. And there's a lot of debate taking place, as I'm sure you may have seen on Facebook or other social media platforms, among parents, educators, and community leaders talking about impact on students and neighborhoods, especially as we're going back to school. The plan does address or aim to address declining enrollment and resource allocation across the district. But a board vote on the final plan is not expected until 2025. So the remainder of this month is going to be spent taking community input. So if you are somebody who lives within the PPS lines, or your child attends that school district, please submit your feedback, and then a final recommendation can be made in September before bringing the plan to several public hearings again in October and November of this year. So there's a little bit of time, but if that's something that is near and dear both to where you're living, but also the education of your child, that's kind of the timeline for submitting feedback at this point. We wanted to shout out again, so our partners in Westmoreland County for the investment in broadband and some recent successful installations. We've been talking about broadband as a policy priority for GPNP for the last year, almost since the lead up to last year's summit, because we know that as we're encouraging nonprofit organizations to, utilize technology differently, especially AI, and become more effective and efficient. And we're also trying to improve digital literacy from a lot of the individuals who receive our services. That is all dependent on a consistent, strong connection to internet. And so a lot of counties in Southwest PA particularly Washington, Westmoreland, and Beaver counties are doing great work in this space as models for partnerships between ISPs and government and nonprofit organizations. So recently in Westmoreland, there was an installation of about 50 miles of fiber optic cable, which brings us to about 60% completion. And this project is expected to be finished by the end of this year. And as part of ongoing conversations, again, Westmoreland was really forward thinking in this space in terms of the way American Rescue Plan Act funds were allocated, and the types of county funding that have been allocated to bring broadband service to more than 3,500 homes and businesses without reliable internet access currently. And then also getting support from Verizon to install infrastructure for an additional 420 properties. So again, we're talking about partnerships with government, universities, nonprofit organizations, and businesses to really improve the quality of life for our individual communities and the entire region. There was also a recent probe into racial bias conducted within the Pennsylvania State Police Force, and it has raised concerns about discriminatory practices. There was a result from the study that reported drivers are stopped when they have different ethnicities at roughly similar rates, but they are more likely to engage in additional searches of the vehicle or follow-up questions, particularly for the driver or Black drivers of vehicles. And so, again, with the way that the relationship with law enforcement is going in this country, this study just kind of backs up a lot of conversations around a need to have more trainings and oversight within law enforcement practices, particularly around traffic stops. And so this report just, again, echoes findings that racial and ethnic disparities, specifically for us in Pennsylvania at the state police troop level, are still in need of oversight while they're still reported to become more rare. So more on that as the results are shared and additional trainings are discussed for police officers. And then finally, at the national level, President Biden has issued a proclamation to further facilitate adjustments in the U.S. solar industry by expanding tariffs on certain imported solar products. This move aims to bolster domestic manufacturing and reduce dependency on foreign imports. This relates directly to a lot of our local conversations around the investment in solar technology, jobs that may be created in Pennsylvania with the transition from traditional fossil fuel energy. And this proclamation increases the tariff rate quota on imports of certain crystalline silicon photovoltaic cells from 5 gigawatts, I'm assuming, to 12.5 gigawatts annually, beginning August of this year, so in place at the beginning of this month. And this is based on positive developments in the domestic industry, including increased production and planned expansions, showing the industry's progress in adapting to import competition, again, as an attempt to bolster economic development in that space. U.S. Customs and Border Protection will enforce these changes with modifications in the harmonized tariff schedule reflecting the new tariff rate quota levels. And with that, that concludes our public policy updates. As we get closer to November, we'll be sharing additional information about registration deadlines. I believe it is October 21st currently, and I just moved to a new home, so even though I am still in Allegheny County, moving to a new location, I needed to re-register for my local polling place. So please make sure that your voting information is up to date. It's really easy to check, and I'll be going through on our public policy call next week that we will kind of cover what that process looks like and how we can very quickly share that information. A poll just popped up on your screen. Please complete those questions to the best of your ability this morning. They're a way to make sure that our future calls for community solutions bring the partners and topics that you are most interested in hearing about, that are most helpful to move your organization forward, and particularly around our investment in our sixth pivot with the strategic design and AI tools that we are working to make affordable and available to especially small budget nonprofit organizations, but really to all of our partners to be more effective and efficient. So with that, that closes our conversation this morning. Thank you, Dr. Farzan, for joining us. I appreciate all of the information you provided about current partnerships and supporting us in moving forward to bring new ones to fruition as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.